Welcome back, everyone. Is this working? Yes. Our Master of Ceremonies has stepped out, and I'm trying to fill her shoes. We've had a very full day so far, and I know a lot of us are feeling tired. We've heard a lot of very hard things to hear, a lot of injustice. So we had this afternoon a session with CSAAWU, and I asked that we can just give our ears and our hearts to the next section. And I call up Deneco to come and take over.
Pesticide Tribunal VIPA. Yeah, good afternoon, comrades. Before I want to start, I want us all to have a moment of silence. We lost our comrade who participated in the build-up to this event and unfortunately lost his life during the course of this week. His name is Andre Botman. If we just can have a moment of silence for you, please. Thank you very much. Yeah, to the build-up of this tribunal, I was thinking, not knowing the process of a tribunal, I was thinking, should I wear a suit to come here? Or is it a formal process? Will there be cross-examination? Do I have to prepare? And I even asked my colleague to send me some photos to see if it's really a judge that's going to sit here and listen to testimonies. But yeah, I'm very honored to be here. So let me start by saying, honorable judges, distinguished guests, and fellow farm workers. My name is Deneco Dube, and I stand before you not just as the General Secretary of CSAAWU, but as a former farm worker, a survivor of the brutal conditions that continue to enslave and exploit those who work the land. I'm one of the last generations in my family with first-hand experience of the inhumane and slave-like working conditions that farm workers endure every single day. So I come before you today not only as a witness, but as a voice for those who remain silent by fear. I speak with the pain of generations, pain that is personal, that is political, a pain that is deliberately ignored by those who profit from our suffering. My story begins with my grandfather, a man who gave his life to the farms, only to have his life stolen by the very chemicals meant to increase productivity. He was the sole breadwinner in our family. And when he fell ill to the deadly pesticides still being used today, we were not met with compassion or care. Instead, we were illegally evicted. We were dumped in a sect in the township, stripped from our dignity, without sanitation, without basic services, and without justice. His death left a deep socioeconomic scar on my family, a scar that I still carry today. This is not just my story. It is the story of thousands of farm workers who continue to be poisoned, evicted, and treated as disposal. It is the story of communities trapped in the cycle of poverty, where speaking out means risking everything: their jobs, their homes, their dignity. Even today, 31 years into democracy, farm workers remain too afraid to tell their stories because the socio-economic imbalances on farms keep them powerless and vulnerable. And you could see throughout the day here, farm workers are scared to speak. They sit with valuable stories, facts, personal experience. But when they hear the name media, they're getting scared because the fear started on the farm. But today we speak that silence. Over the next few days, you will hear testimonies of workers who have suffered long-term effects from exposure to toxic pesticides. You will hear from families who have lost loved ones, from workers who have been denied medical care, and from those who have been evicted simply for demanding safer conditions. These stories are not isolated incidents. They are the direct consequences of a system that prioritizes profit over human lives. As we present these cases before you, I urge you not just to listen, but to act. Farm workers have endured too much suffering in silence. It is time for justice. It is time for accountability. It is time for change. I thank you. We're going to present two testimonies to this tribunal. And before I invite them to the podium, I want to share with the judges the courage that women have to speak out. It was not easy to get them to the States. It have took us lots of preparation, lots of fighting to eliminate the fear, because the fear is there for being evicted. The fear is there for being labeled as a troublemaker because you speak the truth. So I hereby invite Sune Brown to come to the podium to share a story with us.
Amandla, comrades. Comrades, ik is Sune Brown, woonachtig op Groot Constantia. Ik was general worker op bij Eagles Nest, Wine Estate. En ik is vandaag hier om mijn story te vertellen. Vergeef mij zo'n beetje, ik mag daar gelijk zo'n dronk mens. Maar dat is wat die baas op mijn leven gezet het, wat maakt dat ik vandaag zo leuk. Ze moet niet te veel focussen op hierdie oor nie, want hulle is al klaar in hulle jou. So, ek is hier om vandag my stukkie lewensverhaal te vertel. Wat begin het in 2010 op Groot Constantia, Wine Estate. Het ek begin werk as a general worker aan die labor contract. En comrades, ek het begin werk onbewustelik. Wat die vrouwe reg aan 'n mens kan doen. En dat was mijn eerste ondervinding van vangerwerk. En dat is iets wat ik baie van gehou het. Ik heb eindelijk een rechte passie gehad voor die type werk. En ik heb my regtig waar probeer inleef daarin. En ik heb beginnen werk bij Groot Constantia, het ek beginnen werk in 2010. Alles geleerd wat die wingerd betreft. Geleerd om te seier, geleerd om die wingerd te snoei. En ik het zo gewerkt dat ik op die oude dit ek mensen begin te trainen op. Die manier hoe die labor contracteer op mijn staat gemaakt het. En ik het mijn ondervinding het ek opgeteld op Groot Constantia. En in 2013 en 2012 het ek direct vir Groot Constantia begin werk. En ek het dieselfde werk gedoen as 'n general worker, het ek begin vir hulle begin werk. Sê vir 6 maande, het ek 'n 6 maande kontrak het ek geteken. En ek het presies dieselfde werk gedoen. En hulle het ons laat werk sonder enige supervisor of enige manager. En die manier hoe ek geleerd was, uit die labelcontract het ek as 'n teamleader. En volgens mijn ondervinding bij die permanente mannen van die gewe, en de meeste so mensen moest werken, dan gooi je mos je oren en zo te beginnen leren van die expose van die gevaarlijke gewe. En ik heb toen beginnen, elke keer as hulle beginnen sproei, ek is mos nou die teamleader, ek het het maar nou niet gevat, die is niemand bij ons, so wie gaan vir ons guide, en ek het besluit, nee, as hulle nou spuit in die blok, dan gaan ek met die span naar 'n ander blok toe. En so het ek my ondervinding, het ek opgedoen, en in 2013 het ek 'n kiezeltjie opgekry by Eagles Nest, in die afseisoen, terwyl ek geleë het by die huis, het aan Wendy na my toe gekom en vir my gesê, Sune, hulle soek mense op Eagles Nest, net vir labeling, bottling en export stickers plak, en ek is daarin. Hij is nog niet afseizoen. Want ons leed 3 maanden af en na die 3 maanden, dan begint het seizoen weer. Dan gaan ons nog weer terug. En ik was samen met Wendy Eagles Nest toe en daar het my ondervinding nog weer begin. Aan die vineyard en aan die exports en al die. En ons het vir 8 maanden het ons gewerkt, direct vir Eagles Nest. En Wendy het saam met my gewerk, en Wendy na seun. En met die tyd het aan Wendy die werk gelos en aan Wendy het 'n ander werk gekry. En na 8 maande vra ek vir my farmmanager, sien dat ons nog so in en uit in die plaas, kan julle mos maar dan vir ons 'n team maak. En hy besluit toe ja, hy gaan vir ons 'n team maak. En sit ek toe al reeds met die gebrek van my regteroog, wat die kyker het uitgespring. En dit het gebeur op Groot Constansie aan die Labour-kontrak. En die Labour-kontrakteur het daarvan geweet, want dit het in hy tyd gebeur. En ek het operasie ondergaan, klomp dinge deurgegaan. Maar wat het ek gewis, dat is die allergie wat ek opgedoen het op die farm weens die klomp gifstowwe wat het veroorsaak het. En nou ja, nou sit ek nou al klaar, ek is al klaar so tussen halfpad gebrekkelijk. Nou, ek is nou op Eagles Nest. Ons is maar net mense, eerlik, en ek het my manager gesê, dat ek het 'n oogprobleem, en hulle het altyd van my kei gemaakt, so nou, kyk jy aan so. Hoekom hoor jy aan die mense so? Ek is mos nou eerlik, ek gaan toe mos nou sê, nee, maar meneer, ek het dit oorgekom, weens die allergie van die gifwe, en so, en dat was altyd 'n grap by hulle. En ek het hom gesê wat my probleem is, dat ek het 'n 50% in my regteroog, en maar my linkeroog maak keer niks. So, het ek aangewerk, en ek het gewerk, en na 8 maande besluit hy maak vir ons 8 vroue van Eagles Nest maak hy nou span. En van 2013 af het ek gewerk, maar glo my mense, min het ek gewis wat die gewe kan doen aan 'n mens. En een dag staan en werk ons nog so aan blok 5i. Kom een van die sproeiers en ek kom sproei die blok. En ek verstaan nie nou wat gaan dan nou hier aan op Groot Constansie word dan nie so gedoen nie. En hy sproei die blok en ons vat ons 'n baadjies en ons maak ons maar toe. Hy man spuit vir ons sop nat van die gif. En vir die afgelope 7 jaar het dit so aangegaan. En ek het net besluit, die is genoeg. Genoeg is nou genoeg. Ek is mos geen gogga nie. Ek lyk nie soos 'n kalender van die wingerd nie. Hoekom het die mense dan nog gif op ons spuit? En ek gaan na die voorman en ek sê vir hom, Etwil, nou, wat is nou die wat hier aangaan? Die man kan mos nie die gif op ons spuit, asof ons goggas is nie. Hy sê vir my nie so, nee, ek kan maar nie praat nie, want as jy baie praat by die boere, dan moet jy gaan by die hek. Ek sê, maar ek gaan nie vir my laat sê van gaan by die hekkie. Ek is niemand so gogga nie. Ek is ook 'n kalanderie. Ek is nie 'n dier en ek gaan ook nie gif op my laat spuit nie. En ek gee verkopers jou daar na WhatsApp. Ek sê vir meneer, dit is mos nou nie reg wat jy doen aan ons nie. Ons kan nou sien vir ons so laat sop nat spuit van die gif. Jy kan nie vir ons in 'n blok kan sit nadat jy weet hy man gaan gif spuit aan die wingerd nie. Ja, maar so nee man, dis nog die en daai. Ek sê nee meneer, dit is nou regtig. En weet wat vertel hy vir my? Sê vir my, ag wat hy gif maak niks, dis maar amper soos 'n water. Ek sê vir hom nee, vir my is dit net nie reg nie. En mense en so dinge aangegaan. En weet, toe sit dat ek vir CSAAWU begin ondersteun. Mystical gebeur dit. En op daai platform het ek het hulle vir my begin leer wat jou regte is, wat moet en wat nie moet nie. En ek kan nou nie mooi lekker onder wat 'n jaar nie, as ek opgetrek as substeward van Eagles Nest. En so het hulle begin agterkom, e-mail het deurgegaan na hulle toe, en toe sien hulle, goed, jy is die ene. Dis hoekom sy so lekker kan praat. Jou mondjie is lekker warm. So sy is die ene wat die werkers so opsteek, sy is die een wat kan sê, ons gaat nie dit doen nie, ons gaan daai doen. En glo my mense, hulle het my nie getarget nie, hulle het my ook nie geneil, hulle het my verlos. En hulle het vir my enige werk laat doen. Enige werk. Ek het gewerk uit die vineyard uit. Ek het allerlei gifstowwe tot binne in die kelder, uit die kelder uit, tot binne in die wynstoor. Hulle het my even so geleer tot by wyn maak. So van die gifstowwe af tot by die al die ander chemicals van die kelder het hulle vir my blootgestel. Ek het met swale gewerk, ek het gifwe gemeng en dit is al uit mekaar goed wat ek moes gedoen het en ek moes net werk. En hulle het nie gehoor. Maar hulle was bewus, Sune het 50% gewys in haar regte oog. Sy kan nie mooi sien nie. En hulle het my nooit soos 'n nooit van 'n dokter laat sien nie. Hulle het ook nooit even aangebied om vir my 'n dokter te laat sien nie. Van 2013 af het ek so gewerk. In 2022, hoor nog die trikkie part, 2022 word die plaas verkoop. Hulle sê ons niks. Tussen 2022, 23 en 24 is hulle besig om die plaas te verkoop aan 'n company overseas. Hulle sê ons niks. Ons het net eendag so gestaan, die plaas is nou klaar verkoop. Hier kom die nuwe eienaars en hulle kom plak hulle goed op en ons kyk nou wat gaan dan nou hier aan. En die mense roep 'n meeting saam met ons en ons moet nou in die meeting en ons moet nou gaan sit. En hulle briewe, hulle goed en hulle vertel vir hulle wat hulle wette is, vir ons nou wat hulle wette is en wat hulle van ons verwag. En dan kyk die besigheid so. En ek sê vir myself so, nee, hier kom 'n ding. Hier kom 'n ding. Die mense is besig met jou. Hier kom 'n ding. So which means, van die ou eienaars of die manier hoe hulle ons gebehandel het, hulle is nou, in ander woorde, die plan kom nou van hulle af, die plaas is nou verkoop. En 2022, 23 en 24 gaan dinge gebeur nou. Hier gebeur nou dinge. Hulle los, eerste jaar, die tweede jaar, ons het lekker gewerk, er gebeur niks. In 2024, ons is nog nooit ondersoek van dokters nie. Net die permanente manne en die kelder assistant en hulle kies een of twee van die werkers uit. En sy moet ook net weet wat sy praat daar. Hulle sê ook vir jou wat sy moet praat. Sy kan nie nog iets praat nie. Hulle sê vir jou wat sy moet praat. Because sy moet in die company se guns praat. Kyk ek die besigheid so, julle doen dit so, ek los. En weet nie, hier 2024, alle fasade in die boet, ons nog ondersoek word. Ons word nog geroep en ek vraag nou, wat gaat nou hier aan? Nee, ons moet nou gaan by dokter. Nou wil ek weet wat se dokter is, het nie, dis nou die farmdokter wat by al die farms omkom. As 'n man en 'n vrou. En ek sê vir myself so, nee, goed vir Eagles Nest, man. Want hier gaan sy nie, hier gaat hulle gaan jou slag. Hulle gaan jou slag, want dat vir die tyd wat hulle weet, ek is die substituut van Eagles Nest, hulle het my net geloer, hulle het niks gesê nie. As ek beklei vir enige iets, hulle gee. Ek moes beklei vir safeties, ek moes beklei vir alles, vir werksklere, alles, ek moes beklei, vir enige ding moes beklei, hulle het my gelos. En 2024, hier gebeur die ding, ons gaan nog getoets word. Ons gaan nog getoets word, en ek sê vir myself, hier kom 'n ding. En ek is die eerste ene wat instap by die kelder. So 'n kort vroukie. Sy kom na my toe, sy gryp vir my eerste. Sy sê vir my wie sy is en waarvoor sy nou hier is en sy vraag my wie is ek. Ek sê vir ek is Sune Brown. Ek sê vir ek is die substituut van die farm. Ek is van CSAAWU. Ek represent die werkers. En sy sê vir my Sune, vandag gaat sy vir ons alles vertel. Sy sê alles. Want ons is nou hier vir die gifstof waaraan julle so blootgestel word. Sy sê alles. Want ons is hier vir die werkers. Jongen, ek sê vir haar, mevrou, baie dankie, ek is nog so bly, ek is excited, ek is nog so bly, is iemand wat nou vandag vir ons kan help. Mense, julle gaan my nie glo nie. Sy sê vir my, voel jy gaan pie hierso? Ek skryf my nommer vir jou af. Hierso. Enige tyd, kontak my enige tyd, wat julle nodig het, enige klagtes, kontak my, en ek vat die nommer, en sê vir my so, apootjie, ek gaan nog gaan pie. Jo, ek wil nie lag nie. Ek gaan nog gaan pie. Dan so met die omkyk, sien ek, jy, nou wat sy loopink is aan nou die, koppes is aan nou net so. En ek vat die pootjie en ek gaan hier af. Nou moet gou maak, en die ander vrouwmense soek hier achter. Mense, toe ek terugkom aan die pootjie pie, toe sy 'n ander vrou. Hy vrou sê vir my, Mektelie, luister so, hoor so, ek wil niks meer met jou te doen afwees nie. Gee net my telefoonnommer asseblief, en ek wil niks hoor nie. Hierdie goue maak niks aan die mense nie. En mense, ek is nou jammer om dit nou vandag te sê, ek is net so, liewe Vader, wat die hel gaan hier aan? En nou, wat het dan nou hier gebeur? Ek staan, ek is verbaas, my bek val oop. Wat gaat nou hier aan? En ek voel sy hele attitude verander teenoor my. En ek sê vir myself, wauw, omkoperij. Hier is 'n omkoperij. Jong, kopers is net so. Kopers los oosie. Jong, hy hou alles dop. En ek staan daar, ek sê vir myself, wauw, wat het dan nou hier gebeur? Ek sê vir my, sy sê vir my, nee, ek wil niks hoor van jou nie. Niks. Kom, ons gaan sommer nou vir jou eers te vat. En sy begin nou toets my oor. Toe sy met my klaar is, sy sê vir my, Sune, jy is blind. Jy beteken niks vir die company meer. Jy is blind, jy kan nie sien nie. Ek sê my vrou, sy het dan nog eens, nee, sê sy, ek wil nie nog jou storie hoor nie. Want die vrou maak niks aan mense. Mense het daar gesit, ek het sommer aan die bewe begin raak, ek sê vir myself, joh, wat die jylle is hier aan die gang? En toe sy met my klaar is, sê sy vir my, sy gaan nou goed daar met my man toe, na my man toe, en dan gaan toets sy jou oor. Die oor is so klaar. Ek is doof, ek kan nie hoor nie. En as sy terugkom daar, dan kom sê sy vir my, wat sê my man? En dan gaan ek jou report uitskryf. Die company moet myself besluit of hulle jou gaan hou, of wat hulle gaan maak. Ek sit daar, mense, ek was so die mekaar, ek sê vir myself, Here, help my net hier. Wat gaat nou hier gebeur? En sy vraag my details, sy vraag vir my, Sune, waar het jy die operasie geondergaan? Ek sê vir by Tygerberg, en ek sê vir waar dit begin, by Groot Constance in die Labour-kontrak, ek het vir my hele details gegee, en ek sê toe vir haar, waar die dokter vir my gesê het, ek het 'n 50% vision in my regte oog, maar die linker oog is fyn. En sy sê vir my, nee, jy moet terug aan Tygerberg. Hulle soek my hele docket, my hele file van Tygerberg. Maar wat hulle nie geweet het, die is, Tygerberg val nie onder Groot Constantia nie, het val nie onder Constantia nie, net Grote Skeer, en hulle het gevoels, ek moet Tygerberg toe, daai is nog in die seisoen, kyk hoe slim is hulle. Hulle gaan ook kan vir Tygerberg nou bel, en hulle kan net nie by Tygerberg vir my afspraak kry nie, en so het hulle getrek, hulle het hom so getrek, tot het begin raak, of seisoen. En kyk hoe slim is hulle, daar is nog mense getoets, vir brille, daai mense het hulle geakkommodeer, hulle het hulle gery, met die plase vervoer, vir hulle toetse, en mense het die plase betaal vir hulle brille, alles het gebeur, vir hulle, ek is nou die sopstuur. Hulle wag mooi tot het off-seisoen is. Ons gaat nog lê vir 4 maande, aanpy, by die huis. Hier kom die ding. Ek bel hulle, ek vraag hulle, wat is die storie nou? Nee, Sune is nou die en is nou die, en is nou die kant toe, nou seisoen toe, jy moet maar nou self gaan, na Tygerberg toe, en gaan kyk om jou oor uit te sorg. Ek sê regtig, waar werk het nou so? Hulle sê, ja man, ek sê man nou, so, waar moet ek nog jou kry? Hoe moet ek daar uitkom? Nee, dit is nou nie die plaas se probleem nie, maar ek moet maar nou net kyk. Hier staan ek nou. En nou, wat gaat nou gebeur? Mense, ons het die 4 maande gelê. Ek was nog nooit te interview by Eagles Nest. Van my weet wat ek elke jaar doen. 2024 die eerste keer word ons almal, moet die mense nou ingeroep word vir 'n interview. En net 6 van hulle, net 6 moet nou teruggaan. En per ongeluk, sê een van my kollegas van my, Sune Brown, hy moet saam met ons môre gaan vir 'n interview. En die aand wat ek nou vra, maar wie gaat vir ons ry? Hoor ek, maar ek is include. En ek telefoon op die next oggend en ek bel die manager. Sy sê vir my, Sune, ongelukkig het die company besluit, hulle gaan jou nie laat inkom weer nie, want jy is 'n health and safety risk assessment vir jouself en vir die company. Jy kan nie sien en jy kan ook nie hoor nie. En jy moet jouself gaan uitsorteer. Ek sê regtig waar nou. Moet ek nou reg myself nou uit gaan sort? Hulle sê vir my ja. Nou sê ek vir hulle, maar dit is mos nou nie regverdig towards my wat julle nou aan my doen nie. Dit is nie regverdig nie. En ons het 'n argument daar gehad. Mense, en ek lê daar en ek sê vir myself, wat doen ek nou? En ek kontak een van ons officers en ek gee vir ek die hele outline. En ek sê vir hom wat nou hier aangaan. En die saak word gedruk, sê sy hom uit toe. En ons kom daar. Ek was verhoor, die saak het aangegaan en ons het gekom tot op 'n besluit van hulle besluit toe. Okay? Hulle gaan nie vir my vervoer beskikbaar stel nie, maar hulle gaan kom tot op 'n ooreenkoms saam met my. Die company is bereid om vir my R500 te gee vir my brille en vir my ore. So is dit R250 vir my oor en R250 vir my bril. Waar in die wêreld kos 'n bril R250? En ek moes hierdie ooreenkoms sign. Dus kom staan ek nou nog sonder brille. Want ek is unemployed. Die plek wat hulle vols vir my om na toe te gaan, want hulle wil 'n verslag hê van my oë. Hulle soek 'n verslag, ek kan nie lokaal gaan nie. Die bril kos vir my R1900. Hulle is bereid om net R500 te gee. So ek wil nou R250 vat vir die bril, en dan moet ek tot die hospitaal toe gaan met my oor van die ander R250. En ek sê vir myself, wow, wat 'n ding. Wat gaat hier aan? En soos die tyd gegaan het, mense, het my oë baie lelik verswak. Lelik, soos in lelik. Die Roundup, wat per ongeluk op die wingerd gekom het, wat die 3 jaar agter mekaar wat hulle, ek weet hoe het hulle gemaak het, maar dit op die wingerd gekom. En ons moes in my wingerd gewerk het. En min het ek gewus wat die Roundup aan my gaan doen. En my oë so sleg verswak dat ek een nag toe skrik ek wakker. Toe kan ek niks sien. Is alles blou. Alles is blou. Ek kan nie sien nie. En die regte oog was geopereer. Die linker ene was alright. Maar glo my, soos ek vandag hier staan, ek kan nie een van julle se oë sien. Dit is net figure wat hier voor my sit. En soos ek hier staan, sukkel ek om te fokus. My oë pyn. My oë pyn en ek het my hele lewe het ek opgeoffer vir Eagles Nest. Soos hulle van my kei gemaak het, ek is blind. Ek korrel, ek kan nie sien nie. Die vrou het vir Eagles Nest wynestyd aan my R1 se wyn geverkoop op haar eie alleen. Sonder 'n forklift. Ek het alles gedoen. Ek het die labels opgesit, ek het die bokse gemaak, ek het dit geplan en ek het dit ge-invoice en ek het dit uitgestuur. Because oor die jare moes ek myself geleer het om alles te doen sonder om seer te kry. En dat is die dankie wat hulle vandag vir my gee. Ek praat, Roundup is gevaarlik. Ek praat, paraquat is gevaarlik. As ek gepraat, By Kobus, die volmense kan nie aan die rog sit en pee nie. Hulle spuit die rog dood met Roundup. Daar is 'n mobile toilet vir ons nie. Ons moet dit nie wingerd gaan sit en pee. Ons het 'n fiksie. Ek vra vir meneer, sê net gou vir my, hoe kan 'n vrou wat nie 'n man het of met 'n man slaap, so constantly infeksie kry nie? Nie maar so net, jy kan met ek sê meneer, hy sê vir my, ek sien jy raak baie slim. Jou bekkie, jou bekkie, moet gestop word. Toe sê ek vir hom, sy gaan nie vir my sê nie, because why? Sy wil gou vir pos spuit, asof ons goggas is. En as ons na jou toe kom, dan gaat ons die dokter toe nie, sy stuur ons na jou vrou toe, wat nie eens 'n werker is van Eagles nie, sy werk by 'n kliniek. Sy is nie deel van Eagles nie, so mense nie, maar sy stuur ons na haar toe. En so het dinge net aangegaan en dit het net begin vererger. En sy bly nie net op Eagles nie, sien. Groot Constantia. Ek kom terug op Groot Constantia. Ons is tussen 2 blokke. 15 tree van my agterhek af tot by die wingerd. Hier is die wingerd. 10 tree van voor af is nog 'n wingerd. So ons is tussen die 2 blokke. Kom as ek julle gou vertel wat het nou 6 maande terug met my gebeur. Dis hoekom ek in die States is nou. En met my kleinkind van 10 maande oud. So my kind 10 maande oud raak. Skrik hy een oggend wakker, altyd sy oë is toe en blou. Toegeswel, hy kan nie sien nie. En my dokter vat hom kliniek, private dokter toe, en die dokter sê hy het 'n ernstige ooginfeksie. En dit het net gebeur, net voor oestyd, het hulle die wingerd gespuit in die agterkant, en hy drif het ons gevang. En hy moes behandel word vir sy oë. 10 maande oud. Hy is 10 maande oud. En net 'n maand daarna, sy oë is net gesond, 'n maand daarna, my tuin is so teen die wingerd. Sê so 2 tree van die wingerd af as my tuin, ons groei ons eie grondtuin. Agter. As ek in my tuin, sê ek nogal wat is wat en hoe lyk my groente? En hulle spuit 4 rye van my af, spuit hulle laaste spuit in die wingerd voor oestyd. En hy gif vang my gesig. 'n dag daarna, toe kan ek nie sien, toe is altyd my oë toegesweel. En so my komrades as ek hier staan, vandag sukkel ek nog altyd. Die lig is te skerp vir my, ek kan dit nie hanteer nie. Ek kan dit nie hanteer nie. En soos ek hier staan, ek sukkel. Moenie vir my kwaad word. As jy vir my hallo sê en ek sê net hallo, kan ek nie sien naam en ek kan nie sien wie het is nie. Ek is eerlik vandag soos ek hier staan en dit maak my baie seer. Soos julle hier sit, as net figure, ek kan niks sien. Ek kan nie julle oë sien, ek kan nie sien waar julle neus is, ek kan niks sien. Ek kan niks sien, mense. Ek het tipstoos aan Somerset West, se sliding door, se glas uitgeloop, van ek het gesien dat hy sy deur. Ek het die e-time wat ek by laag gaan koop het, die geld het ek gevat, ek het dit net in die winkel neergegooi, en ek het in trane uitgebars. Dit as wat die slavernij, wat sy opoffer vir jou baas, dis wat hulle aan jou doen. En vandag sit ek disable met 'n gebrek, en daar was hy eers vir my 'n 10 rand gegee, om te sê, dankie Sune, dit het hy vir ons beteken. En om alles te kroon, in 2024 laas jaar, hulle voel hulle wil my retreat, hulle wil niks met my te doen hê nie. En as jy dat hulle dit nie weet nie, word ek geëviek van Groot Constantia. Ek moet die plaas sy huis leegmaak. So ek sit so in 'n werk, ek is blind, en ek moet die plaas verlaat. Wat nou? Hoe nou? Ek is 'n enkel ouer. Ek is 'n enkel ouer wat ek kan doen nou. Hoe maak ek nou? So, comrades, het is tyd dat ons op die platte van ons voete staan en veg vir dit wat verkeerd is. As ek dink, my kleinkind is 10 maande en dat het al klaar vir hom effek. En waar gaan dit nog strik as hy ouer raak? Kyk hoe lyk ek. Ek is klaar, dis able. Ek is klaar, dis able en daar is geen vergoeding nie. Ek kan nie in die nag loop nie. Ek val my mors dood. Ek loop die voetes vas. Ek stamp my kop teen enige iets. Want ek kan nie sien nie. Ek kan nie sien nie. En dit, my harde arbeid, en dit is die dankie wat hulle vandag vir my gee. Toe ek as mens die plaas verkoop, hulle het die plaas verkoop, so nou het 'n miljoen rand terwyl op 'n ander vir hulle verkoop. Hulle het vir my op 2000 rand gegee. Daai is die dankie sê. Sy was 'n goeie werker. Sy was 'n goeie werker. Sy mag nie teen hulle wette gaan nie. Sy moet net werk. Dis by tyd dat ons sê genoeg is genoeg. Ons kan nie dat ons kleinkinders en ons mede-kollegas onder dieselfde deurgaan wat ons deurgegaan het nie. So comrades, ons vat vandag, ons vat dit terug. En ons sê genoeg als genoeg. Amandla!
Thank you, Comrade Sune Brown. It's a very sad story. It's one of the millions of stories that is outside there. Many of those who have died also. Some are still speaking from the graves, seeking for justice. Comrades, without any delay, I want to invite my comrade Wendy Linnert from Groot Constantia Wine Farm. Can we give her a hand of applause, please?
Goeiemiddag, allemaal. My naam is Wendy Linnert en ek woon al 35 jaar op Groot Constantia Wynplaas. Ek het in 1988 op Groot Constantia begin werk. My man, oorledene, Raymond Linnert, het ook op die plaas gewerk. Ons was albei permanente, algemene werkers. Ek en my man het in die kelder, in die wingerd, die tuine gewerk. My man het plaasdoder spuiting van die druiwe gedoen. Hy het geloop terwyl hy gespuit het met 'n spuitpistool op sy rug. Hy het omstreeks 5 uur voormiddag tot 6 uur, 7 uur begin spuit met 'n middagete-pouse van 12 uur. Die bespuiting het ongeveer Oktober begin en tot middel Januarie, Februarie aangehou. Dis mos nou totdat die oes ryp is. Tydens die middagete was die spuittrekkers naby die werkershuise geparkeer. Die inwonende vrouewerkers van Groot Constantia het die werkgewer gevra hoekom die trekkers daar geparkeer is. Aangesien dit 'n bedreiging vir die gesondheid en veiligheid van die plaaswerkers se kinders inhou. Die werkgewer het geantwoord dat hulle nergens anders het om die trekkers te parkeer nie. Die plaas het ook die akkerbome aan die agterkant van die werkers se huise gespuit. Die plaagdoder het op werkers se wasgoed en huise geval. Toe die werkers ook by die werkgewer kla, is vir ons gesê, hoekom vra julle simpel vrae? Die algemene werkers almal deur die bespuiting geraak, want al was ons nie spuiters nie, was die blare nog nat toe ons in die wingerde ingegaan het. Geen beskermde klere, insluitend stewels, is deur die plaaswerkgewer aan enige van ons algemene werkers geskaf nie. My man en ander is net van 'n stofmasker voorsien. Geen opleiding of plaagdoders is aan enige van die algemene werkers verskaf nie. Die spuiter se vroue moes hul man se besmette klere met die hand was. My man het uiteindelik begin kla oor sy oë dat hulle brand. Hy het ook gekla oor sy arms, gesig, lippe en hande. Ek het vir hom gesê om op te hou spuit en vir hom gesê dat hy sy werksklere moet uittrek sodat hy nie die plaagdoders inasem nie. Die dokters het vir hom 'n brief gegee waarin hy aangeraai was dat hy moet die spuitwerk moet ophou om ligte diens. Dit was in vroeë 2000. Sover ek weet het die werkers, die spuiters net een keer vir mediese toetse laat gaan, maar hy het nooit enige uitslae van die dokters gekry nie. Na sy besoek aan Grote Skuur het my man se probleme aangehou en aangehou. Hy was in en uit in die hospitaal. Eendag het hy huis toe gekom en dit was in 2016. En ek kon sien hy lyk glad nie goed nie en ek het gedink, hierdie man gaan dit nie maak nie. Hy het swaar asem gehaal en het gekla oor sy longe. Elke dag het die bloed by sy neus en mond uitgekom wanneer hy hoes. Ek het nog nooit soveel bloed by iemand se mond sien uitkom nie. In 2016 het ek vir my man gesê om Victoria Hospitaal toe te gaan om 'n privaat dokter te sien. Het asemhalingsprobleme geondervind en hy is aan die plaagdoder blootgestel. Teen die begin van 2018 was my man baie siek. Hy het aan hartnier en longversaking gely. Hy het ook water in sy hart en longe gehad. Sy bene en voete was geswel. Hy is op 28 Maart 2018 oorlede. Daai is nou my man se storie. Nou is dit my storie. Ek het van 1988 tot 2008 op die plaas gewerk. Eendag in 2008 was ek besig om te snoei toe 'n stok in my oog steek. Ek het na die werkgewer gegaan en vir hulle gesê, ek het 'n getuie, because it was injury on duty. En ek moes die kyker is beseer. Ek het 'n klep op my oog gedra. Ek moes vir 6 maande vir gereelde ondersoeke gaan. Daar is vir my gesê, my oog is fyn, maar ek het geweet my oog is nie reg nie. En ek was gediagnoseer met asma en diabetes. En toe later deur CSAAWU was voorgestel aan ons. En dit was mos nou my oorle man se besluit. Ek het besluit om op te hou werk aangezien ek kon voel en ek was 50% blind in my regte oog. En toe die uitsettings 2018, toe my man dood is, 2 maande, toe begin hulle met die uitsettings in 2018. Ja, en van daar af was het net uitsettings aan mekaar. En jy as vrou is bekommer van sy kinders en sy kleinkinders, waartoe? Ek meen, ek kom reeds, ek bly 35 jaar op Groot Constantia. En waartoe nou? En ek sê vir myself, ek gaan nergens heen. Want dit is nie laat jy vandag uitgaan en dan kry jy sommer 'n blyplekkie. Ja. En ek sê vir my kinders, ons gaan nergens heen. In 2018 gebeur daar 'n brand in my huis en dis my kleinkind wat die brand aangesteek het. En ons kon nie pa kwalijk neem nie. En ons staan daar buite, die mense wat werk op die plaas, hulle ry op en af, hulle ignore vir ons, joh. My hart was gebreek, kom ry. Ek was in 'n toestand gewees, want dit is my kleinkind wat dit veroorsaak het. Ons kan nie nou met haar stief handel nie. Ons kan niks doen nie. Hier verloor ek my man 2018 en Junie man gebeur die brand. Nou waartoe nou? Hopelose vlakte. Maar dank die Here vanmôre vir die geleentheid wat ek kon hê om te kan praat oor wat met my en my familie gebeur het. En ek sê vanmôre dankie vir die geleentheid en die Here seën.
Thank you very much, Comrade Wendy Linnert. And Comrade, just to give you a background, Groot Constantia Farm is one of the oldest wine producer farms in South Africa. And it's a state-owned farm. But today, all of those workers who live there are facing evictions. They are threatened by evictions. They are threatened by the city of Cape Town that are suggesting that they must relocate into another area where the conditions is terrible. And the workers are resisting. They even come to their workplaces. The comrade Wendy who spoke now, they come to a workplace on several times to convince her to take money from them so that she can voluntarily leave the farm. And she refused for several times. And they're still trying to do it with other families. Some will give in under the huge pressure that they are facing. Some have accepted the monetary to voluntarily leave, but we are still fighting for these comrades at Groot Constantia. Their cases are represented by lawyers, and this is just the drop in the ocean. We are sitting with many eviction cases of elderly workers who are retired and who cannot work anymore. And the farmers, what they are doing is when you retire, they want to relocate you to a smaller house on the farm. So if you stayed in a 5-room house, they want to move you to a 2-room house to make space for a younger family. And there is no difference, even though Groot Constantia is a state-owned farm, they are worse than the private owners, the private farmers that have farms. And you can see that there's a collaboration between government and these private farmers to make sure that at the end of the day, they will get rid of farm workers on farms. You don't have to look any further, comrades. You can just turn around and see for yourself the beautiful luxury estates. This is what they're busy doing. They have declared that we don't want any farmers in the next few years on farms. All of them will be dumped. You can see townships that are born Definitely, people occupying land. People's furniture are drawn in the night from farms. They are promised bungalows and monies, and they are located during the night. If you look up in the morning, there's a new shack. There's a new township. Some of those are even called COVID-19. Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Julius Malema. These are names that people associate themselves with because of the resistance and the circumstances that they are facing. And comrades, we really must give our attention to building the unity and power of farm workers. This injustice is coming far back before democracy, and it's still continuing on the same trend. And you can see that the lives of farm workers are just getting terrible and terrible and terrible. We don't have human dignity. We are not seen as citizens of this country. We are left in the hands of these farmers who start treating farm workers like slaves. And there's no intervention from government, from state institutions, nothing. Instead, they're cutting the budget of the institutions that have to serve farm workers. There's no land for farm workers when they got evicted. They have degraded to such an extent that if farm workers are evicted and the court say they must provide alternative accommodations, they say the first thing they say is, we have some poles and zincs. Go and put up a shack there in that squatter camp, which they declared is illegal. Those are the alternative accommodation that they provide for farm workers. And it's high time that we make an end to this injustices, comrades. It's high time. So we are not going to give the floor now to ask questions because of time. We want to immediately go to the judges if they want to ask any questions or clarifications from the two testimonies that was given now.
Well, thank you very much to yourself, Secretary General, but also to Sune as well as Wendy. Just one question each, and both, where are they living now? I understand Sune is unemployed, both of them are unemployed, and where are they currently living? And particularly for Wendy, after the house burned, what happened thereafter? Was the whole house destroyed? Was she able to recover any of the items? Is she living in the same building or is she living elsewhere?
Toe die huis brand, het was groot skade. So, en kommerheidshuisgoed is baie duur. So, ek het my hele kamergoed het ek verloor. My kombuis goed het ek verloor, my dogter, my oudste dogter, sy daagkamer goed verloor. En dan my jongste dogter se kamer het ek verloor. Al wat oorgebly het was sy sitkamer se goed. Ons het die bedding gehad he, en het was baie tragies. Maar ek het by niemand op die plaas gaan vra nie van almal was teen ons. Die mense Groot Constantia lewe baie vyandig met mekaar. En dus hoekom ek nie die moed gehad het om by iemand se deur te gaan klop om te sê, help my met 'n kop bier, ons kry koud, ons goed het uitgebrand. Niemand het vir ons gehelp nie. Niemand nie. Ons het self hy brand. Ek moet die brandende komberse moet ek nat gemaak het om my brand te probeer beer plus en ek moes almal my kinders uit die huis uit kry. Van ek kon gevoel het my bors en my kinders, my oudste dogter se bors was baie seer. Ons was vol rook. En die Groot Constantia het vir ons by jou dokter gekry. Ek meen, hy was 'n kind van 10 jaar oud gewees wat hy brand veroorsaak het. En toe sê Wendy Prins, ons moet na 2 slaapkamerhuis. Ek het in 'n 4 slaapkamerhuis gebly. So het was 'n 7 vertrekhuis. Ons moet na 'n kleiner huisie, moet ons trek na 2 slaapkamerhuis toe. En ons moes maar onsself insettel en tevrede stel en ons almal moes eers in 1 kamer. Moes ons almal geslaap het. Ons was ek, my 3 kinders en dan my oudste dogter se kinders. O ja, dat is wat gebeurde. Dankie.
Thank you, Comrade Wendy. Comrade Sune, you are still staying in the house on the farm, no? So she's not evicted. Sune is still staying on the house, in the house on the farm.
But she's received an eviction order.
Yes. Did you exit anything? You exit anything?
Ja,
Yes.
alles geëvikt op my kleinkind wat nou, my kleinkind van 10 maanden, was nog nie gebore nie, maar my seun, sy dogtertjie van 6 jaar oud wat by my bly, sy het ook 'n uitsetting gekry en die sheriff het dit mooi gestuit dat almal word uitsettings gegee en my seun wat haar pa is, moet maar sommer vir haar van 6 jaar oud haar regte, haar ene lees en haar regte vir haar gee. Dit is wat gebeur het. En my kleinkind het gaan skool by Constantia Primary. Die kinders wat uit die kres, die kinders wat in die kres is, as hy die kres het gesit. Dit is wat nou op die plaas aangaan. Hulle evikie mense, die mense word afgedank oor hulle kinders, wat hulle moet self na omsien. En as die kind, as die ouer afgedank word van die plaas, soos hulle gedoen het met Kobus en Noulien. Hulle het vir Noulien afgedank, omdat sy moet self na 'n kind gekyk het en sy kind se gesondheidsomstandighede. En die plaas het gevoel, daar is in die tyd wat hulle vir ons eviek, wat Kobus het hulle met Kobus hulle so aangaan. En die plaas het gevoel, dat groot is hier die hospitaal wat hulle kind onder is, soos, wat is hy hospitaal se naam? Red Cross, ja. En die kind, alvorens gaat hy nou nog operaties onder, en hy kan in geen kris, kan hy as sien. En as hy kris, dan gaan met sy man na homself kyk. En die plaas het gevoel, dat hulle gaan nie vir haar in die kris laat hek, om na haar kind te kyk hier, hulle gaat haar eie afdank. En die dokter, die doktercertificate wat die dokter gee, en as die dokter a leave extend is onwettig towards die plaas. Toe dank hulle haar af, en die dag wat hulle vir Kobus afdank, wat haar man is, diezelfde dag, toe kom hy uit tot op die plaas, en hulle sit, hy kan uit die kruis uit, En hulle stuur huis toe. Dit is wat aangaan op Groot Constantia Farm. Dat is hoekom as daar nou huidiglik meer labor-contractwerkers as permanente werkers aan Groot Constantia. Hulle vat buite mense aan, maar hulle gee nie vir ons werk op die plaas nie. Dis 'n easttydsplaas, maar daar's meer mense wat kontrakwerk wil doen, waarvan hulle die labor-contractmense, hulle moet net werk. Hulle moet net werk sonder enige PPE, sonder enige voordele, sonder enige regte. Hulle moet net werk. Klaar. Hulle vat buite mense aan om in die kelder te werk, buite mense om in die kres te werk. Hulle stel companies aan om in die kombuis te werk, maar hulle gee nie vir Groot Constantia se mense werk nie. Die meerderheid van ons werk buite as wat ons vir die farm werk. Dit is wat nou aangaan op Groot Constantia. Hulle wil al die plaasmense van die plaas af hê, daar wil hulle van die onderste gedeelte van hy huise wil hulle bed and breakfast maak en die history van die plaas af bo wil hulle afgooi, hulle wil plat stoot. Waarvan hulle al klaar besig is, hulle het al van die huise, soos hulle die mense, geëviket, het hulle al toegebou.
Thank you, comrades Sune. And the only sin that these farm workers have did was to join a trade union. It's the only sin. That is the punishment for joining a trade union.
Thank you very much, Comrade. Just a very quick one from me that I think you could probably just help me with. My real appreciation to Sune and to Wendy for that, heart-rending story. I am not certain about the ownership issue here and what the role of the municipality is. Constantia, I'm a little bit confused about it. Maybe you could just help me as to why would the municipality have a role there?
Maybe my comrade will assist them.
If anybody knows the history of Groot Constantia, it's actually comes from Simon van der Stel.
Yes.
Mense, go on their website and you'll see. The problem is that it's currently owned by a NPC, which is a non-profit company. It has about 12 directors. And you don't know who those directors are. You know. Nobody knows. It's not on the website. Okay? So the only way how you'll be able to know is that when they do get sued, you see, the NPC hides the trustees. Do you understand? Because in the normal course, as you know, in 97, 98, they used to sue in the name of the trust. So all the trustees' names had to be there as an NO, in their capacity. Now you register the trust as an NPC, so you sue, the NPC becomes a legal entity on its own. And it's done as a non-profit, which means it has no stakeholders. But even though in terms of the law, it has no stakeholders and it's deemed not to be a for-profit, in its existence, it operates like a for-profit. If you just look at it, so that is where the challenge that you're sitting with regard to Groot Constantia. So Eagle Nest, there's about 3 or 4 or 5 of them that forms part of the broader Groot Constantia and Klein Constantia. So you need to be able to see it not as just that, and it's currently owned. 93, it was given already over to government. 93, before 94. So let us not go back into the history, because Stellenbosch, as you know, pre-1994, you have your 99-year lease agreements. Everybody knows about that. Yeah? So most of its farms went into a lease. So it's the same in terms of what happened in pre-1994. And so that is where we mustn't forget the history. So similarly, Groot Constantia pre-1994, even though it's currently owned, it's owned by government. But who is the 12? Who are those that are directing? And even though they say they are doing it without compensation, I'm sitting there as a director without compensation. But what does that really mean? And so when we talk about audits, Let's do the lifestyle audit of those directors then. Stop going where it doesn't matter, because the challenge that we're sitting with is decisions need to be made on a fiduciary level in terms of saying that those women have to be evicted. It's Groot Constantia NPC that's going to evict those people. And so when it comes to Europe, when it comes to the West, we need to be able to understand you are the ones that are living on those bed and breakfast places. And so it's coming on literally for 30 years. So that is your owner. Groot Constantia NPC with 12 directors that will make the decision to evict those people. And so we need to be able to just track back, because it's not isolated. It's all together in relation to what's happening to these women. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade. Is it still on hold, Constantia? Monsieur?
Just a quick
Is it
follow-up.
my turn now?
Oh, Judge Navy. Sorry, apologies. It's Judge Navy, apologies. Can we give Judge Navy a chance? Sorry. Judge Navy, you may ask your question.
Who are the beneficiaries of this NPC?
Can we just give Judge Navy a chance to ask a question, and then we proceed on Groot Constantia?
Yes, but are we going to just note that this is an important question about the
Yes,
beneficiaries,
the
so that we
beneficiaries.
understand where the revenue is going if this is an NPC? Who is benefiting from Constantia? So you can just note that, and then maybe you can respond. Thanks.
I'm prepared to wait. Yes, this is the chair saying, please go ahead.
Thank you, Judge Navi.
Yeah, super.
Maybe someone can
Yeah.
assist us.
I will start with Mercy, and then I will come to this comment.
So we anticipated some of these questions about Groot Constantia. And so we've got quite a lot of the documentation, including the names of the boards of trustees and so on, as opposed to going into all the details here now. I did say to the judges that we will email all the documents so that you've got the names. We've got the 2024 report, so it's useful. The link to the city of Cape Town or to the province is mainly that it's an historic, it's a heritage site, as been said. On the farm itself, there is a big slave museum, and it's linked very closely to Ezekiel. I mean, for all of us as first people, so-called colored people or people of slave origins, this is a very important historic site. So it's really a problem, the whole eviction story and the way in which the farm is, they're attempting to change the demographics of the farm and who lives on the farm and so on. But I think for us, the CSAAWU, we've got the documents and we'll hand it over, and it's quite a bit, so perhaps it's better to email it to whoever's going to send the documents to you. I think Heidi or Miriam, and then I think you'll have a better understanding. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Mercer. Comrades, we have 6 minutes.
Okay.
Past 4.
This is really important because this concerns, heritage stuff, right? So just for judges to note that I think what's really important that's slipping through the cracks is that there's an authority involved. It's called the Heritage Western Cape. It's got legal status, legal regulatory status. Okay, so it looks like this body was empowered in terms of legislation that probably created this authority. And then this authority is given powers, I think, in terms of Section 27 of the provincial, it's provincial heritage site. No, yeah, Section 27 and the provincial protection. Yeah, so I think you need to look at several interlinked legislations, because there's national heritage legislation for national heritage sites. Then provincial heritage sites are dealt with differently. And they're dealt with in terms of authorities created under the administration of the provincial government. Now, this authority has authorized, or has authorized the declaration of Groot Constantia as a provincial heritage site. It's one of 7 heritage sites in the Western Cape. And then if you Google Groot Constantia TripAdvisor, it comes up as a must-see for European visitors. And so for all intents and purposes, if you look on the internet, and really we've been trying, it's opaque, completely untransparent. You just don't know who these board members are. You can't, this needs investigation. These evictions are unconstitutional. It's not just illegal, because everything about this is extremely suspect. And I think, in addition to, and please excuse me if I'm out of place, but not that we just want to recommend really to the judges that in addition to the relief that have already been discussed by Shiham and Rico and others, we would like some guidance or some strong recommendations on the issue of Groot Constantia, as to optimize, to capture the power of, and how power is organized in this province around land and resources that belong to all of us as our heritage. So that's the heritage issue for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to give Judge Pillay on the issue of the municipality involvement, Judge Pillay, it's regulated in terms of the Extension of Security Tenure Act, ESTA, which applies to the eviction process of farm workers. So before the farmer can evict a farm worker, the law requires them in terms of ESTA that the municipality must be informed, the rural development must be informed, and it even is now amended that they must have a mediation process. Parties must come together to discuss alternative accommodation or how they can resolve the eviction without the person being homeless. But even if the law is there, Judge Pillay, the courts are still granting eviction orders without the people having alternative accommodation. Here in this province, in the Drakensberg, people are evicted like flies. You just see a value coming to your house with an eviction order, and your furniture is dumped along the roads. People have to sleep. Unions and NGOs have to stay with families in night along the roads, and that is legally granted. Even if it goes to the Land Claim Court for review, it comes back and is confirmed that the eviction is legally. So these are the challenges that we're facing in terms of the eviction of farm workers, and it's a pandemic on its own here in this province. It's a pandemic on its own. So I just want to share that with you. Can we please ask now for Judge Navy to ask a question? Please come on.
Thank you. I have the floor.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So my questions are to you, Denel, and Sune, and to Wendy. on what you've just described to us. Firstly, let me say, all my life, I've been working on human rights violations, and this is one of the worst cases of unaddressed community violations that I came across. So I want to first express my sympathy and solidarity with you. So I want to focus with Sune and Wendy on the reprisals. But with you, Deneco, can I ask you to expand a bit on this very important statement you made? You described your experiences from the time of your grandfather, and they haven't seemed to have changed from colonial times. So all that's very moving, but extremely disturbing. Since we heard yesterday on Human Rights Day how wonderful this country is doing on Human Rights Day. So here's your statement that your grandfather's experiences are still being put in practice. So you said it's time for justice, for accountability and change. And actually, these are the three promises our government made. It's not promises, these are the obligations, the legal obligations our government undertook when they signed the international convention. So if you can add a little on why these things are important and why they're not being delivered, what it is that the union is asking for. Now, my question to Sune and Wendy is much simpler. It's about the reprisals against you, that you are called troublemakers, that you're being punished, you're being evicted. So can you tell us a bit more about when these reprisals start? For what? Is it because you started talking about your rights? Is it because you started making complaints? Is it because you started working with trade unions? So, about the reprisals, when did it start? Why is it still continuing? Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Judge Naidoo. I will start by responding on the statement that I made in my experience in terms of the illegal eviction processes. The first thing is that navies and judges is that there is no stop currently on the term that they use as illegal eviction. Illegal evictions are still continuing. And my experience are just the drop in the ocean. And farmers, through this historical slave and master practice that comes from during apartheid and before, it's that they create a system where farm workers must be dependent on them. And being dependent on them, you have to do whatever they say. If you are doing the opposite of what they are saying, they say you are getting politic, you are a troublemaker, you declared war against them. And even to the most basic rights which is outlined in our constitution, the right of freedom of association, even that right are suppressed through this system that they created that is controlling the lives of farm workers. And that's why the density of unions in the agricultural sector in this country is not even more than 5% in agriculture sector. Because if you dare to join the union and you don't have much resistance, You will collapse under the pressure that they're putting through. They will take away the transport that they provide you to town. They will take away your doctor certificates, letters that they give you to go to the doctor. They will even take away your gratitudes that you get if you're getting bread or things like that. They will take all those things away and say to you, go and ask the union. This is what they are doing with the farm workers on the farm. Still today, 31 years in democracy, they will say if you want the transport, you must first resign from the union. This is what they're still doing. And what we want, the first thing, and I'm so angry and disappointed in this current president that is now overseeing our country. He came to peril in 2019, and he made a promise when he was deputy president to say that we must put a moratorium on all evictions from the farms. Since 2019, into his second term up until today, he did not manage to deliver that promise. And what they're doing now is they create this stakeholder engagement fake things where government institutions come together and discuss issues of farm workers. But they know through the austerity mechanism they are using now, there's no budgets to accommodate, for example, alternative accommodation for the land, because the land in the Western Cape are being sold to private developers. And by doing that, they create false promises for farm workers and keeping them hoping that things will change. We say as CSAAWU, we want a moratorium on evictions. The houses of farm workers on the farm must become their property. It must be owned in the name, must be registered in the name of the farm workers. Because the state that during apartheid have subsidized those houses. It was the houses that were subsidized by the state. If you go and read the history of agriculture, the state have subsidized to build the houses. So it's the state obligation to take the houses back from these farmers because it's not their property. It's the property of the owners because the owners of this country is the citizens. It's not the private farmers. We want a moratorium on evictions. We want the dignity of farm workers to be restored. There's not even clean drinking water as we speak now, 31 years in democracy. People are still drinking water that is contaminated with pesticides. People's houses are leaking. They don't even have a basic necessity like a toilet in the workplace. They bring toilets in when the auditors is coming. When the auditors done, the toilets has been taken away and putting aside. Basic human rights. We don't want, for now, what they call, we take the land from the US. We say, restore the dignity of farm workers. Give us our basic human rights. That is what we want. That is enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Give us our right access to medical, quality medical, housing, education, class facilities for our children, and land, so that we can start to produce our own food. Because when they take our land pre-1913, we have produced our own food. We have produced our own food before they took our land by force in 1913. So yeah, that is what we want, Judge Naidoo and judges. It's now 22 minutes past 4. I think I will close the session for now, comrades. We are running over time and judges don't like that.
Thank you so much, Deneco. You were so reluctant to facilitate, and I kept pushing, and I'm so glad I did. So I have an announcement before we get into our last presentation. Firstly, I'd like to really thank the translating team. They've afforded us time to get up to 5 p.m. And this is really so gracious of them because we understand what needs to be shared in this room. We feel it, we are living it, and we understand we have to have the platform. But we are also working in constraints of time, and we just want to ask our next presenter, Professor Saloshni, who has traveled a long way and has waited throughout lunch to give us the expert testimony. So I'm going to ask you to come right up as your presentation is put up. Tech team. And please don't kill me, but we are not going to go for tea. We are going to try and conclude, and then we have tea at the end. So we are going to just try to push this session to complete. Thank you so much.
Sanbonani, greetings from KwaZulu-Natal. I'm honored, esteemed judges, honored guests, all protocols observed. I'm really, really honored to be able to stand here and share this day with you all, and to listen to the testimonies, but also to know that while there's a lot that's been spoken about what's happening in the Western Cape, I think across South Africa, there are a lot of farm workers who are enduring and who are going through similar experiences as you are here, as you've been given testimony today in terms of what you've experienced. So I've been asked, and with all due respect to the men, I don't think you're any less important, but I've been asked to speak about and to give testimony on the impact of pesticides on women's reproductive health. And I think that often, with health and with pesticides, the silent effects of it go unnoticed and unrecognized, and often within agricultural communities, because of all that the workers are dealing with, the reproductive impacts or the reproductive health effects that women suffer are not recognized and not noted. And so when we look at women today and we look at employment within the world globally, sorry, can I have the first slide? So what I want to share with you is that I think women have entered over several decades now, have entered the employment sphere, and the number of women working today is steadily increasing. And if you look at this slide, it puts it into perspective. Here in sub-Saharan Africa, in the southern part of Africa, we have a large number of women going into employment. And as more and more men move more into the industrial sectors, the interesting part about it is that their positions in agriculture are actually being filled by women. The next slide. And look at this in Africa. There are more women working in agriculture than there are men in Africa. And this is commercial agriculture, but also in small-scale agriculture. And within our own country, as we attempt to readdress the imbalances of the past, more and more land is, in terms of agriculture and agricultural enterprises, even within my province in KwaZulu-Natal, the initiatives are targeting women. And so you have a large numbers of women going into agriculture, whether as small-scale farmers or as formal agricultural owners, farming owners. So this brings into the context of what is happening between women and their exposures to pesticides. it becomes a very, very important question that we ask. Because how are women, or how is women's health being affected, and particularly the reproductive impacts? I want to share with you the next few slides, the next slide, please. We talk about the exposures of women to pesticides. And you will see documentation around the traditional ways in which women are exposed to pesticides, which is in their occupational exposures. And because they have entered both commercial and small-scale agriculture, they're now involved in all tasks which were previously delineated for men. You find women involved in them. So it's the mixing of pesticides, it's the spraying of pesticides that they, which ensure, or at least is responsible partly for their exposure. And this is from work that we've done on the Makatini Flats in northern KwaZulu-Natal, which where you can see the nature of pesticide mixing and pesticide application that goes on. Then, of course, if they're not working as pesticide appliers, they are working within the field and are usually either pruning or they are responsible for harvesting in the field. But this all tends to happen because we have such poor safety control measures. You will often find that spraying is going on and women are pruning in the fields. And so that then exposes them to the pesticides. We also have very, very poor re-entry practices. If you read a pesticide label, it will give you details of how long you should wait, usually 48 to 72 hours before you enter the field after pesticides have been sprayed. But of course, we in agriculture, because there's this pressure to actually get the work done, people seldom follow the instructions in terms of re-entry time. The other aspect is that because of the lack of literacy and lack of awareness of the dangers related to pesticides, people don't actually practice the re-entry control measures, or at least take time to follow the re-entry time periods and then enter the field. So there was a mention here about the absence of sanitation in the farms. In the fields, there's really no access to sanitation and water. And you'll usually have a bucket or some sort of hole dug into the ground where water is kept for the whole day. And then your workers have to use that. And so you can see here, one of the female workers, she's worked in the field. Now she's washing hands in that water, which is already contaminated with pesticide, which has been sprayed through the day. So there's this occupational exposure. But remember that as women, you may work, but you also have another responsibility. And next slide, please. And this is that of being responsible for household chores. The person who's responsible for washing all the clothing that either husbands or sons or even they themselves use while in the field, which is contaminated with pesticides, it's women who are responsible for doing this. So when washing it, they're exposed to the pesticides which are within those clothes. The other aspect is that often they live near the fields. And so even if you don't work on the fields, if you live close enough to the fields, mention has been made about the drift. So pesticide drift will actually contaminate households. And it's been shown from various studies that you actually can measure pesticide levels within households in close proximity to the fields. If I'm working on the farm, I'm also responsible for making sure everybody gets fed. So what do? I find time while I'm working on the farm to also do my cooking. And so usually I cook in the proximity of the fields. And if pesticides are being sprayed, the food that I'm cooking is contaminated, and so I'm eating that contaminated food. And lastly, on this issue, when you only earn about 100 Rand or 200 Rand in a day, and you've got to spend about 60, 70 Rand or even maybe more of that on your pesticides, it's an expensive and vital and important commodity for you. So you store it as close as possible. You keep it as safe as possible. Most women in small scale agriculture, we found, actually store their pesticides with their food. In their homes, alongside whatever they may be drinking, but that's their idea of keeping their goods safe. And I think these photos that I put up there reflect this nature of domestic and household exposure for women. Work that we've done, the next slide, please. The work that we've done on the Makatini Flats, so we've actually studied more than 900 women working in small-scale agriculture on the Makatini Flats, which is in northern KwaZulu-Natal, where you have an irrigation scheme, which is man-made, and you have dryland areas that are also farmed. And we were very interested in the safety of women and what safety practices they observe. And you will see here that actually, when it came to pesticide storage, a large number of them either stored it very close to their home or within their homes. And the other issue with pesticide exposure in a domestic setting is the use of the containers. These pesticide containers are large containers. When you don't have running water and access to running water in your household, you are expected to go twice a day to gather water or to get water from your nearest water source. What do? These pesticide containers, when they're empty, become a very, very good vessel for carrying your water. So inadvertently, those pesticide containers, which are used for washing of clothes or carrying of water, increases exposure in the household. So even if you don't work in the fields, you are exposed to pesticides by virtue of drinking that water. The next slide, please. So what does this mean in terms of reproductive health, particularly for women? Pesticides, and this is not Bio 101, but the pesticides can act centrally in your pituitary gland, affecting hormonal production. It can also act locally at the level of the ovaries, influencing fertility. It also crosses the placental barrier and so can affect the unborn baby. So with pesticide toxicity, we are concerned with the impact on the reproductive organs, the endocrine system in women, and also abnormalities of pregnancy. So the next slide, please. What does the evidence show? So looking at the evidence in the literature out there, based on studies which have been conducted both globally and in South Africa, we unfortunately can't have randomized control studies, which are the ideal, because we are aware of the adverse effects of pesticides. So we can't do these sort of clinical trials. So we have to rely on studies done within communities and within agricultural settings. And a lot of our evidence comes from questionnaire-based studies in agricultural communities, and also some studies, for example, in Europe and in the United States of America, where they have these long cohort studies, so studies where they followed agricultural populations over a long period of time and studied reproductive impacts in women. The next slide, please. So some of the reproductive effects that have been studied are issues of menstrual irregularity, fertility issues, spontaneous miscarriages, and then preterm births and congenital abnormalities. So this evidence here on menstrual irregularities is from the Agri-Health study in the United States of America, which was conducted in 2 agricultural populations, that in Iowa and in North Carolina, where they studied women in the menopausal age, in the premenopausal age, between the ages of 21 and 40, and looked at whether they had pesticide exposure and what did that do in terms of their menstrual cycles, and also whether or not they had missed their periods. Now, these are subtle measures of outcome. Think about it amongst the women in the room. I mean, unless it's a regular occurrence in your life, most times you just move from one month to the next month and not actually bother about it. But they, having collected this information, have found that women who were exposed to pesticides, who either sprayed pesticides or whose partners had sprayed pesticides, and so they were indirectly exposed to it, were at least about 50% more likely to have had missed periods or longer menstrual cycles compared to women who had never sprayed pesticides or never been exposed to pesticides. And if those pesticides had an hormonal component to them, so when endocrine disruptor, there was a 60% to 100% chance that they were more likely to have missed periods or longer menstrual cycles. So this irregularity in association with menstrual cycles can be seen in terms of this information, this data. The next slide, please. Fertility. So a lot of fertility studies have been largely done in men as opposed to women, because it's much easier to do studies in men. All you do is you take a sperm sample, and it's easy in the lab to count the number of sperms and to look at the sperm constitution under a microscope. To actually study fertility in women, it's much more difficult. And the fertility studies that are out there are more related to DDT and its spraying of DDT to control malaria. Not so much the agricultural pesticides that we accustomed to using. Here in this study, this is a small study done in Iran, and it's only looked at about 650 women. And what it shows is that there was a higher likelihood of infertility in women who were actually exposed to pesticides as opposed to women who are not exposed to pesticides. Of course, there are other adverse reproductive health outcomes which were also reported in the study, but I wanted to actually point out this relationship to infertility. But it's a cross-sectional study which is dependent on individual reporting of data. The next slide, please. So miscarriages are more likely to be reported by women and more likely to be remembered because it's an event. But it's the later miscarriage. The early miscarriage, if you have a miscarriage in the first 8 weeks of pregnancy, most women don't report it because most times they think it's a heavy period and it goes unnoticed. So it's very difficult to measure for that. But in this study here, this is in the absence of a long cohort studies. This was a systematic review which was conducted. So with systematic reviews, we take a whole lot of studies and we join the evidence from all of these studies and look at what it is showing. Here, there were more than 2,000 articles for this study, which was reviewed, of which they only selected 18 studies, and they've reported on 13 here. Largely because these were cross-sectional studies, it was questionnaire-based, it was dependent on individuals' memory of an event. But nevertheless, what the evidence demonstrates is that if you were exposed to pesticides, you had a 41% greater chance of having a spontaneous abortion, as opposed to women who are not exposed to pesticides. Okay, so that's quite a significant finding. And this is quite strong evidence relating pesticide exposures to spontaneous abortions. Next slide, please.
All my bedding, it's all messed. No, I'm fine.
No,
So I got job for
you've missed a slide. One more. So yeah, okay, no, the next one, yeah. So we, in our work on the Makatini flats, we looked at this issue of spontaneous abortions. And we looked at whether you had sprayed pesticides in the first trimester of your pregnancy. All the women who we interviewed reported on reproductive health outcomes, and we were particularly interested in this. And we found that both women who worked on the irrigation scheme and women who worked on the drylands, in both instances, if they had sprayed, they'd been sprayers, and if they had sprayed pesticides in their first trimester, they had a far greater chance, the odds of 2.8 and 2.5 odds of having reported a spontaneous abortion as compared to women who hadn't sprayed in the first trimester. So this is evidence of the impact of how pesticides crosses the placental barrier and is likely to cause, to affect the fetus early on in the pregnancy and cause abortions. So the other two aspects that I mentioned was that of preterm births and congenital births. Congenital defects. Next slide, please. Here, there was a meta-analysis that was conducted of about 1,800 studies in which they reduced it and found about 21 studies which were suitable, looking at the strength of evidence. And they found that there was actually a 10-fold increase of pesticide concentration, that if you had a 10-fold increase of pesticide concentrations, then your risk for preterm birth and also a shortened gestational period in your pregnancy increased tremendously. So the odds, you had at least about a 28% chance of having preterm birth if you had increasing levels of pesticide exposure. The only problem with this evidence was that actually the sample sizes in the studies which we used to provide this evidence were very small. And so we would want to see larger sample sizes to be able to concretely say this, there's a strong body of evidence for this relationship. Next slide, please. And the last aspect that I want to raise is that of birth defects. So in a review that was done, where they reviewed about 94 papers, and here they particularly focused on pesticide exposure and 3 types of congenital abnormalities. That is neurotube defects, so problems with the nervous system, urogenital, problems with the urogenital area, and cardiac abnormalities in children. And they looked at birth outcomes in the children. And they found that there was a positive association, or at least the data showed positive trends relating pesticide exposure to abnormalities. The weakness of this evidence was that the exposures in the mothers were not well quantified. So in some studies, it was just a reporting of, yes, no, I was exposed to a pesticide. And in other studies, they couldn't actually indicate how that was measured. So there's still some work to be done in terms of birth defects. But here in South Africa, next slide, please. A small study that was done in the early 2000s in the Eastern Cape in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, looking at birth defects and pesticide exposure in a rural community, found that it was done in Cecilia Makawani Hospital in Eastern Cape, and they looked at children who presented with birth defects and babies who were born at the same time. And what they found that with mothers who were actually exposed to pesticides, there was a far greater likelihood of them having a baby with congenital defect. Next slide. And here, in this group of women, if they used a container which had previously contained pesticide, they had about an 87% chance of having a baby with congenital abnormality. So it means that, those pesticide containers still contain pesticides despite you washing them out. And if they actually treated their animals for ticks with pesticides, there was also a greater chance of them having babies with congenital abnormalities. So this is a study from South Africa. What I would like to say in conclusion, the next slide, please, is that the evidence of how women are exposed to pesticides is there. There's very strong evidence. We live it on a daily basis in the agriculture sector. The studies that are both international and some in South Africa show strong associations for certain birth outcomes or adverse reproductive outcomes, particularly in the case of miscarriages. In the case of adverse outcomes such as preterm births and congenital abnormalities, and also fertility, the evidence is not so strong for women. We do have some research in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, but we don't have those long cohort studies. And largely that's because we don't have the funding to do those studies. To be able to embed ourselves in an agricultural population and to be able to study the health of agricultural workers for a continuously long period of time. Next slide, please. So what would we like to do? First of all, as I've said, there's this need for these continuous long-term studies within the South African context, and for us to be able to understand the problem in the local context better. We definitely need stricter regulation of pesticides, and banning of highly hazardous pesticides is a no-brainer. Okay. And we shouldn't even be discussing it. Government should have done it a long time ago. The fact that we're still asking the Minister of Agriculture and trying to provide him with the evidence to actually ban it is very concerning. It shouldn't even be a point of discussion now. What we do need is to focus on alternatives for pesticides and to invest in that in agriculture. And we definitely need far more. So yes, this is a form of advocacy, but there are a lot of women out there, a lot of men also out there in small scale agriculture who we really need to get the message out to. in terms of awareness around the hazards of pesticides and how to protect themselves, and the adverse impacts that these pesticides can have on reproductive health for women, but also for general health of farming communities. I'll stop there, and thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge all of the collaborators who participated in our research on the Makatini Flats, our funders, and also the People's Health Tribunal for actually having us and giving us this platform to speak on this issue.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Naidoo. Program Director, may I
don't
go
know if there's
first
any
with some
questions.
questions?
you
May
so
I
much.
go first with some questions?
So we are almost 10 minutes out, but I'm going to kindly ask you to bear with me a little bit. I think one of the things Professor Saloshni indicated was that in some of the work that she was presenting, what was a weakness was that there was no proper measurement of the pesticide exposure, where people would just say yes or no. I'm going to kindly ask Wisdom Basera, who is one of our experts, and he has a presentation, but I'm going to ask you to just focus on the key things in your presentation for at least 5 to 10 minutes, so that we just honor you as our expert who has taken the time to be here. And then our judges, I know it has been a long day. You have a lot to really sit on. I was going to ask you to give your remarks, but maybe we are going to pack that a little bit. We'll start with you tomorrow morning on Dorothy's session, and then maybe we can have some review of what we had today. So Wisdom would be our last presentation, and we will close for the day.
Sorry, Program Director, I asked for the floor because I have to leave in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes, Judge.
Right.
Would you like to go ahead now? Did I hear you correctly? Would you like to give an input?
Are you speaking to me? I don't know who you're speaking to.
I'm speaking to you, Judge. Would you like to take the floor?
Yes, may I ask my question now?
Okay, please
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
thank you.
Okay.
Firstly, Dr. Naidoo, thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank you for sharing it ahead with us, because it's a heavy paper, very moving, and the tribunal needed to read that. Now, you may have answered this question already on follow-up and continuing work and the need for further research. But I noticed that your report is actually now almost 25 years old in respect of the Makatini Flats. And I want to know, are you asking the tribunal then to accept everything you've said as applying to the situation today as well? What do we do with this evidence, which is now 25 years old? So that is my one question. And the other, thank you for all those graphic pictures. What it told me is that women were being used as sprayers as well. So that was new to me. So I want to limit myself to 2 questions because of time factor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just a point of correction, our work on the Makatini Flats was done in 2011. So it's not 25 years old. And we continue to do that work. It's reflection of the current reality in small-scale agriculture in South Africa today. Not much has changed. And the second question? That's this question.
The second question is the use of women as sprayers. Yeah, we didn't come across that in the Eastern Cape, but you have pictures of women spraying.
Yes. So women spray in small scale agriculture. Those are the spraying pictures from the Makatini floods. But it's seen in other communities as well, in other small scale agricultural communities in South Africa as well, where you have women sprayers. In fact, even in commercial agriculture today, if you go to the sugarcane plantation farms, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, women spray. It's not men who spray.
Thank you.
Okay, we are right on 5 p.m. Can I give you 5 minutes? No. We start tomorrow. Yay! Consensus. You must be also tired. He needs more time. Okay, so we will try to sit and rearrange some things for tomorrow's program. Okay, I'm a bit confused from suggestions from the floor. No interpretation. Yes, I know we really pushed it. Okay, I think that's a better suggestion. So Wisdom cannot join us tomorrow. Unfortunately, we have to cut off translation for his presentation because they've really been gracious with us and pushed us to 5 p.m. So please, can we give our translation team a round of applause for all the support? Thank you. Thank you so much. So we are going to try to give Wisdom maybe 10 minutes, not 5. I was pushing it. So Wisdom, if we can have you up for your presentation, and I do really apologize. If you're dying, just go out a bit and get a cup of coffee. I do apologize.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to present some of the work that I've been part of since 2017. I will try to really condense what we've been working on for the last almost 10 years into a presentation that is 5 minutes. So most of the work that we have been doing is very similar to what Prof. Naidoo spoke about, because we look a lot at pesticide exposure. So what I'll do for now is I'm going to skip this first slide, and I'll move on to the slide that gives a pictorial view of the work that we have been doing since 2017. So can we please move on to the 4th slide? This one. So what we set out to do in 2017 was to gather a cohort of about 1,000 children in 3 areas within the Western Cape where there's a lot of farming activity. So what we did is we went to Hex River Valley, Grabouw, and in Piketberg. So these are areas which are known for high agricultural activity. And one of the chairs of the Swiss-South African Partnership for Global Health has been working within these areas for a very long period of time. So what we did in 2017, as we gathered these 1,000 kids that we wanted to follow over a period of time, we went to the schools and we went to the communities to recruit these people. So we went to the parents, to their homes within the farms. It was a very hard exercise, just being able to access these farms, see these parents, and ask for consent to see their kids at school. But what we did on 2017, which we called the first baseline visit, we did a couple of tests with these children, right? With a questionnaire, we sampled some blood for reproductive hormone levels. We took some urine samples from them to check for pesticide metabolites. We did some basic measurements of weight and height. just to see their physical development. We did tenor staging, where we graded where they are in the developing process. Then lastly, there was some neurocognitive testing where we tested issues of memory, issues of speed, and how they actually handle tasks using a standardized Cambridge method. So we did that in 2017. And then between 2018 and 2019, we did some work within the community where we sampled the air that these children live in, we sampled the water, and we also sampled the soil. And then in 2019, we repeated what we had done at baseline in 2017. So we sort of like created a mini cohort or longitudinal study. Can you please go to the next slide? So as I mentioned that between 2018 and 2019, we sampled the environment where they come from. The first thing which came out when we sampled the rivers where this agricultural activity happens is we saw that there was quantification of the pesticides themselves and their metabolites in the water. That's the first thing. So these metabolites are actually in this water and they contaminate the water bodies which are within these study areas, Grabo, Piketberg, and Hex River Valley. Moving on to the next slide. We also sampled the air. So with air sampling, we just put these passive air samplers within the schools and within some areas of these communities. And what we found out, we had all these pesticides and all these metabolites actually being measured from the air. This speaks a lot to the drift that is within these particular areas. Then moving on to the next slide. This is what I was talking about. So this is one of the schools, I think this is in Piketberg, where we were putting air samplers. Then can you move on to the next slide? All right, so we also measured pesticide levels from the soil. And this is what we found in these three areas. But here we mainly focused in Hex River Valley and in Grabo. Then moving on to the other one. So then what we did is we just wanted to understand the level of exposure that these children have, because they play around within these communities. At times they work. We gave them silicone bands, like just wristbands. Mothers, or let me say guardians and the children, and we followed them up for 7 days. So wherever they went, whether they were at school or they were playing or they were at home, they had these passive samplers, these silicone wristbands. Then after 7 days, they were collected and they were sent to the lab for testing. And these were the plethora of pesticides metabolites which were found in these silicone wristbands. And an extra layer to that, what we found out is children have actually a higher exposure compared to their parents because kids play a lot. So what will happen is maybe they enter the fields which have been sprayed, which is the re-entry which has been spoken about. And even though this might be a controversial statement because it comes from self-reports, some of these children actually work in spraying, mixing, and loading in these different regions. Moving on to the next slide. Then our study was put in a qualitative assessment or a meta-analysis with other studies within the region of Africa. And what we are seeing is there is a lot of current use pesticides, which is within the environment. Next slide. So just the main message that I would have loved to say to everybody here today is wherever there is agricultural activity, Western Cape or the rest of South Africa, in short, the pesticides and their metabolites are in the air that we breathe. They are in the water that we drink at times. And basically, the pesticides are also in the soil. So whatever we're doing, there is this cycle of continuous exposure that we have. Thank you so much. So we acknowledge the participants, the 1,000 kids. We've been following them since 2017. Right now, we're in the third cycle of follow-up. This is from 2025 until 2028. So we've had these kids and we have been seeing them when they were still young up until now. And some of them are even mothers and fathers now. But we are really grateful to the children that we saw from these areas and the funders of all this work. Thank you so much.
Because Wisdom is not going to be with us tomorrow, I'm going to ask maybe if the judges have any burning questions for him.
Thank you, Dr. Basera. Very valuable and useful information. But of course, one cannot but be really see red flags. It was really a very long list of pesticides that came from the silicone bans. Two things. What were the levels of exposure? You know, how high were the levels? How worrying were they? And secondly, you mentioned something important about a finding you had during the study that children may have been working. I know it was not part of your study, but any idea how old they were?
Okay.
Mixing pesticides. I mean, it's beyond my comprehension.
Yeah. Okay. For the levels, what we're mainly focusing on in terms of all these measurements, whether it's from the water, the soil, or the wristbands, is the fact that there is quantification that's going on. So the technicalities of how risky those exposure levels are, I think that is usually left to the experts, because what we were basically communicating is these highly hazardous pesticides that we have problems with, they are there. The kids are being exposed to them. And that is a fact because there is that quantification that happens. Concerning the spraying, mixing, and loading, that is actually my work that I'm doing with these children. And unfortunately, because when you work within these communities, these children or the guardians or the parents have quotas in terms of what they are supposed to do, right? Maybe I'm just preaching to the choir here. Then what ends up happening is they end up bringing in and roping in their children to assist them with that work. So the spraying, mixing, and loading was not the only activity that these children were self-reporting. I would love to emphasize that. They self-reported being part of this work. So it's spraying, mixing, and loading, storage of pesticides, burning of pesticide containers, and doing some maintenance work. And when we first saw them in 2017, they were between the ages of 9 and 14. The 1,000 children. If there are no more questions, thank you so much, and thank you.
Two questions. Kindly bear with me. Just to, I think I noted hand here. Anybody else? Require coming out.
I'm sorry, but the activist in me cannot not say something about this. These are children, let I remind you, between the ages of 9 and 12. They should have no chemical contamination in their bodies, nothing. The wristbands that they were wearing are indicative of exposure that they cannot control. Whether they have a choice or not, they are exposed to chemicals that are going to harm them and probably harm them for the rest of their lives. So that exposure will confer some kind of disability that they carry on for the rest of their lives. I think that's really important to highlight. The second point I want to make is that the highest exposure was for a chemical called chlorpyrifos. That chemical is banned in most countries around the world. It has only recently been banned in South Africa, I think in 2020. But it is indicative to point out that in most countries around the world, that chemical was banned in the 70s, 40 years ago. As long as I have been alive, just about, that chemical has been banned in some countries. Those children don't have a choice. They are born and they are exposed throughout their lifetimes. And that exposure will confer harm throughout their lives. I think that is something that we really want to point out in this tribunal and that we want to take forward.
Oh,
My question is in relation to the rivers, in the pollution in the rivers, because we know in the areas that you did do the research, children are close to the rivers and they're swimming in the rivers. What was the level of pollution into the rivers that you find? Because the commercial farmers denied that they are the one polluting the rivers, because this is also safe spaces for children to play in.
Yeah, maybe the fact that I could not, zero in on the levels which were within the different environments. But of importance is the fact that there is water sources and water bodies within these farming communities. You'll find out that the concentration of these metabolites varies from one water body to the other, depending on whether they are using it for mixing, for example. So that's where you will find higher concentrations. And whether it's the general rivers, I am not quite clear right now, or I don't remember very well the quantities, but they were quantifiable. And some of them were actually above the limits which are recommended. And that's why, some of them were highlighted in red and all that. Thank you.
Ready? Oh, okay. I see two more bending hands, Computer and yeah.
Thanks for the work done. It's a small question to ask that I wonder if you might have engaged those authorities that controls water, like a Department of Water, like irrigation boards, and their view in relation to the quality of water and their mandate. So what will the response if you've engaged them around this? Thanks.
Or you're talking about the quality of water?
The water boards he's talking about.
Or water boards. Okay. That's beyond my expertise. But within the chair, this global health research chair, there is a department that looks at water quality. Those, I feel like they're the ones who better answer that question. But there is work which is happening in the background, looking at issues of water quality and issues of air quality.
I think my question, so thank you. It was fascinating. I really appreciated it. I wish we had more time for both these studies. My question is similar to Simpiwe's. Perhaps I will rephrase Simpiwe if you will allow me. It's about what have you done with this research? Has it been taken to the schools? Has it been taken to the Department of Agriculture? Has it been taken to the throughout the country? There are these associations of farmers and communities and municipalities that control water. That's what he's talking about. We call them water boards and so on. So it's simply about what has been done. This is shocking. And I think it's this issue that's getting us worked up, me especially.
Okay. I think maybe I'll also allow Prof. Naidoo to respond to this, because what we usually do when you do research is you publish in a journal. Half the time you'll try to make it open access so that anybody can access it, right? And that's one. But what we have done with our research is, since we've been going back into the same communities for the last 8 years or so, we drafted some findings from our work, and we left a copy in all of the schools where we were, because I think in total we had about 10 schools that we were working with. So they have results from our work, just highlighting the important things and also just making a few recommendations and suggestions on how the community can protect itself from this exposure. So at that level, that is what we have done. Maybe the other stuff I will leave to Prof. Naidoo. Sorry for putting you on spot.
Thanks for that question. So with all of our research, we obliged to, first of all, as Vincent has said, we work with communities. So it's co-creation of research. So we usually answering questions that are burning for the communities themselves. So we report back to the communities. In our case, we worked with the agricultural women's associations on the Makatini Flat, the different groups, and we fed back to them, but also we went back and did training as well. So that's an important part in terms of ensuring that not just the message gets to them, but also we put in place an intervention. That also we work with Department of Agriculture and feedback to them in terms of what we're finding, and Department of Health as well. Besides, the publications, that's for the academic part, but really the research we do is to answer questions so that we can develop interventions to address it at the local level. Thanks.
So
last question. I'm gonna be the last one, promise. As we're looking through the research and all the stats that you've given, my question is, from all those children that you've been doing your research on and going to schools, and have you ever looked on their academics, since they are obviously exposed to these pesticides, on how is it actually affecting them academically at school, or since you started said 2017 till 2019, which is a very long time doing the studies with them. So have you ever looked through their academics to see the effects or in findings on all that? Yeah.
To answer that, my colleague was here and she was supposed to present today. Paula Riglietti. I'm not sure if she'll be here tomorrow. She was here, yes, actually. So did she present? Yeah, so just to speak on some of the things that we did. So one of the tests that, battery of tests that we gave these children was what they call the CAN-TAB, and it looked at neurobehavioral outcomes and how kids fare in cognition, memory, and all that. So the link between how some of these things have turned out over time is definitely something that is worth our attention.
Thank you so much, Wisdom, and thank you all for your flexibility. Our esteemed judges, the brave women and men who stood before us today to give us their lived realities, our experts, the facilitators, our tech team and communication and support team, our rapporteur, Dr. Stephen Greenberg, who is documenting all this for us, and all of us. I really want to thank you for such a moving, emotional, but powerful day one of our tribunal. I would like to bring our day to a close with a few announcements that we are going to have a free time from now until 7. Tina, is it 7? Tina starts at 7. We're expected here tomorrow to start at 8:30 sharp. Tomorrow is the